You are with us on the General Overseas Service of All India Radio. In our program Dateline Delhi, we bring you a discussion on defence allocation and defence preparedness. The participants are Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, Amit Cowshish, former Financial Advisor Acquisitions at Ministry of Defence, Saurav Jha, Chief Editor, Delhi Defence Review, and Ajay Banerjee, Defence Correspondent, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Today on the show we are discussing India's defence budget. With me is Visitors panel, Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, former DGMO, now heading the St. George Centre for Joint Warfare Studies, Mr. Amit Cowshish, former Financial Advisor Acquisitions MOD, and Saurav Jha, Chief Editor, Delhi Defence Review web portal. General Bhatia, I'll start with you. We are talking about the budget, and the budget figures, which I'm including the pension figures, is around 4.31 lakh crores. It is 15% of the government spending. Is it enough? How do we meet the requirements of the three forces?
There's a question, Ajay, which has been bothering everyone. There are competing priorities at national level. I don't think the military should expect anything more than what has been given. But the key question is, what has been given, are we optimally expending that? Are we building it to enhance our combat capabilities, our combat effectiveness or not? So that remains the key question. The demands are one too many, as we are all aware, that the Ministry of Defence has signed 204 contracts in the last 4-5 years, which amounts to something like 2,47,987 crores. They've also acquired an acceptance of necessity for 214 projects, which is valued at 4,43,000 crores. So that is the sort of a figures we're looking at. But if we think that we'll get 7 lakh crores over the next few years, I don't think we're going to get that. The question remains that we have our disputed borders. We have our continental defense, we have our maritime borders, we have our airspace requirements. The armed forces have got to work together and to make sure that we have enough war prevention capabilities.
So you mean a common logistics train could help us?
Yes, definitely. We need joint logistics, we need joint communication, we need joint training, a lot of jointness. We can cut costs out there. We can cut a lot of costs otherwise also. You see, 63% of our import of weapons are ex-imports. So we have to pay a very heavy cost for that. Firstly to acquire it and then to maintain it in the life cycle. And as the equipment gets older, the maintenance cost goes higher and higher. So today we're looking at something like 60% of our equipment is of vintage origin, and just about 30% is midlife and 10% is cutting edge. The ratio should be 30, 40, 30. So older the equipment, more the maintenance cost. So we got in the vicious circle of lesser revenue and lesser capital, and where the needs are much more. So this we need to overcome, and we need to create a defense industrial base of our own, make sure we have our own weapons and equipment, and 80% of our weapons and equipment are low to medium technology. So I'm not ready to believe that we don't have that capability. We have the potential with the capabilities. We have a good policies in place now, but what we don't have is the procedure and the processes have not kept in pace with the policy changes. So on ground, things haven't changed the way it should have.
Mr. Cowshish, I'll ask you a question because you have been with the MOD Finance, you have seen the budgets closely. The data given out by MOD says that this year we'll be spending around 1.08 lakh crore on capital expenses, and that constitutes around 31.7% of the total central government's capital expenditure. That means around 31% of the country's whatever new projects are being made in the MOD or Ministry of Defence, that means the three services in the Coast Guard. Sir, we are talking of money, hardcore money. Is this enough? Or do we need more because the projections of the services have been falling short in the past, and how do we see it?
Well, I don't think there is anybody who seriously questions the need to give more money, but the question is, where do you get the money from? If you look at last year's figures, the amount that was asked for by the armed forces, especially under the capital segment, was about 76,000 crores more than what they got. If you also take into account the revenue segment, then the gap between what was allocated and what was asked for was 1.12 lakh crore. So I take it that the estimates were accurate. That is the money that was required. And therefore the question has to be focused on the ways and means of getting this kind of money, which is a question that nobody actually either takes up or answers. The problem in the system is that it is known beforehand what kind of money is going to be available. For the last couple of years, the MTEF statement, which is laid before the Parliament in the month of August, which very clearly spells out the kind of money which will be available in the next 2 years. And the actual allocation is somewhere in that region, either to accept that reality and plan accordingly and see how to optimize that allocation, or to go on then asking for more money and then say that we don't have the money and therefore there's a problem. So that choice nobody has made so far.
Saurav, you study this international events very closely. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, which monitors data of military spending, puts China spending at 250 billion annually. We are doing around 45 or 47 billion annually. If not comparing India and China, how do you see our rise? One, and secondly, adding to it, how do you see India facing its challenges internationally vis-a-vis new equipment, weapons, because we continue to be the biggest or the largest importer of weapons in the world? How do you see that?
Well, it can't continue indefinitely. Right now, there are these LTIPPs out to 2027, which is guiding some of these acquisitions. But it cannot continue indefinitely. At some point, we have to indigenize in a credible manner. And for that, we have to increase the spend on defense R&D, which is only 6% of the defense budget, not of total MOD expenditure, just what is called the defense budget, and less than 0.1% of GDP, if that matters at all. So we have to now have a proper pathway for reducing imports or even completely eliminating imports, because we have to get bigger bang for buck. Like the other speaker said, it is not a question of whether we need more money or not. It's a question of how, my speaker said, it's a question of how we spend it and where are we going to get it from. So we have to reorient ourselves now in a manner that actually supports indigenization, which means we need to innovate at home and we need to export. Exports will help us with getting the money for our own needs as well, to an extent. This is the difference between India and China. Rather than, China is an economy which is 4.5 times larger than us. And so comparing overall defense MOD expenditure with theirs isn't really moot. Their requirements are also much bigger. They have to face off the United States in the South China Sea. They also have to maintain a certain deterrent posture against the Russians, even though they are now fraternizing with them. And of course we are there as well. They have an entire theater command dedicated to us. So the thing is that they have very large needs. We also have very large needs, no doubt. But as far as I am concerned, for the foreseeable future, our basic posture, which is of deterrence vis-a-vis Pakistan, deterrence by punishment, and the dissuasion posture vis-a-vis China, of deterrence by denial, is in place. I mean, the budget is all right for that.
And that costs money.
Yeah, that costs money, and that amount of money is there just to hold things together.
But as you say, it can't go on. When you talk of localization or indigenization of the production, how do you see it panning out in the next few, years, when we are talking of a fighter jet, the Tejas is just flying in, and it will take probably 5-7 years more to mature? How do you see it pan out?
We are going in for some emergency imports. There are 21 MiG-29 UPGs which will be brought in. There will be 18 Su-30 MKIs, more license produced. Then there are booster doses like the S-400, which is going to be very useful to plug air defense gaps and generally to keep the Pakistani Air Force off-footed, because it's like a strategic offensive SAM, if there is something like that. But the thing is that we do have, because of our nuclear capability, there is a threshold to how far conventional escalation can go in the Asian region. So we have to use that to indigenize. We do have a window of opportunity to indigenize. We cannot constantly keep saying, we cannot constantly behave as if we are not a nuclear power and that we only have conventional weapons to deter our enemies. We do have nuclear weapons. We have a second strike posture. There is no need to tinker around with our NFU unnecessarily. That is another issue altogether. But we have the window to indigenize, and we need to do that now. And all the emergency requirements can be met and are being met even with these budgetary allocations.
General Bhatia, you are part of a think tank now. You have been part of the army, you have been a DGMO. Today the cost of establishment, which is to explain to our listeners, is salaries and pensions, if we may add, is taking up almost 50% of the budget. How do we go forward from here?
Yeah, that is something I think we'll have to live with. We cannot say technology is not there, firstly. And when the technology is there, technology doesn't work in all our, we got terrains at 5,000 meters. You have all of your disputed borders of around 4,500 average height meters I'm talking about. That's about 16,500, 70,000 feet. So technology doesn't really work out there. And as they're disputed, we have to man the borders. So I think there's very little we can do about the manpower, which is the combat manpower, the combat potential. But yes, what we need to do is we need to right size it. We need to right size our combat support. We need to right size the combat services support. We need to have jointness in a lot of things. We go to look at pay and allowances of the non-military personnel, which is about 6 lakhs plus. That also costs a lot of money, and that comes out of defense budget itself. So we've got to look at that also, and this can be done. I think we need to open the defense sector, especially where the defense equipment is concerned. Exporting is only one part, but exporting is a good thing. But we should first make a difference in our own needs. Then only we can export. So that is what we don't have. Honestly, we don't have good small arms also right now. We're importing small arms. So that is the thing I'm talking about. So when you look at manpower cost, let us look at the manpower cost in a holistic manner and see everything which is there, which is being paid out, right? And not only just touch the combat elements of it. I know the combat elements are required. Let us slowly and steadily replace technology, get technology into it, and see what we can do about replacing the manpower. Get the better weapons and equipment, better surveillance systems, better C4ISR systems, exploit artificial intelligence. There are many things that can be done, and things are going, but our systems do not allow us to leapfrog. So these are very steady method. The reason is we got to be present ready and future relevant. So if it is the present ready, I have a job to do today. We cannot expect someone coming and sitting on our side of the LCLC, holders keepers, or on the LEC, if someone comes and sits in our claimed area, in our territories rather. Chinese claims our areas, about nearly 100,000 square kilometers of it. So these are things which are daily. Our fleets have to go out. We have to dominate the seas. We have to make sure the airspace is not violated. So these are everyday affairs. So we have to look at it. We have to look at the manpower cost, definitely, but manpower is not the only cost. When we talk about manpower cost, frankly, we'll have to rework the system. There are enough studies that have been done, but there's a lack of will in implementing the studies. That's how I would say. There's a Shiketkar committee which was there. Before that, there were other studies which are there, but there's a lack of will in implementing it. There are reasons to it.
Yeah, Bhatia, when you talk about lack of implementing the Shiketkar committee, if I remember, Ajay Shiketkar committee had spoken about cutting down expenses by 25,000 crores over the next 4 or 5 years. That implementation is done probably 1 or 2% only the military farms has been done, if I remember correctly. Jalsa, what you have brought out is that we should not expect more because there is not enough money. The military has to right size, if not downsize. There is a restructuring process on in the Indian Army. Are you happy with that?
Definitely, there is a restructuring process on in the Indian Army, and that will take a few years to settle, and these need to be tried out also. So let's see what is the final shape it takes. I'm very happy that the Army has realized that it has to do it, and there is a very sincere effort to make sure that it succeeds. So that is a change which I'm seeing. But Army alone cannot do it. It has to be the three services together. It is a nation put together. All the resources have to come together. We have other elements like the R&D, the DRDO, the Ordnance Factory Board, the DPSUs, and there are many other things which contribute to directly or indirectly to defense preparedness. So our defense preparedness has to be optimal. In certain places, I think our defense preparedness is suboptimal. So that is where we need to put the monies in. We need to change the system and the structures. We need to change the process and the procedures, not the policies. We have a procurement procedure and we have acquisition wing. We should be more worried about acquisition rather than procurement. Procurement is a one way off. When I say procurement, then I need it, I take it and I use it. So I paid very heavy cost for that, to cost of maintenance. If we have a defense industrial base, I would not need the reserves which I have today or which I want today. I don't have it, but I may not have it in full, but I want today. So these are costs which I can cut down, a whole lot of it. But we are looking at monies which are there, and if we can utilize what we have optimally, I think we'll be much better off.
Cowshish sir, when we talk of utilization of money, there are two critical aspects which people often talk. I have already narrated the figures. I'll remind the viewers again that we are talking that the Ministry of Defence is spending around 15.5% of the country's entire budget. So that's a huge amount for a country like India, which has got priorities in health sector, education, social sector, road building, railways, so many other priorities. You think the three services are now realizing that money may not be enough for continual expansions, which may not be, I'm not saying needed, but may not be adequately needed? You think that is the position? And secondly, sir, how do you think that this military industrial base which General Bhatia has spoken about, what is holding it back?
See, first of all, I don't know whether I should be saying this, but I don't think there's enough realization, because I just mentioned earlier, it was only last year, not far that what was demanded was 1.12 lakh crore more than what was mentioned in the MTEF of 2017 that was expected to be given. But this is no indication of the realization that you have to make do with whatever money is going to be available. Which is not to say that efforts are not being made, but I don't think these efforts are concerted efforts. These are disjointed efforts, and therefore somebody has to look at it. Insofar as the second part is concerned, it's my personal view. I am not very convinced that while I don't disagree that we have to indigenize and we have to make defense equipment in the country and so on. I don't know if there are any studies which show what kind of savings we'll be able to achieve. It's not foregone conclusion that what is made in India will be definitely cheaper. And in any case, the question is, by the time you start making things in the country, your requirements will grow, because the requirements have been growing. If you look at the last 10 to 15 years, and I've been sort of watching this, there are certain years in which the gap between the projection and the allocation goes down, but generally it has been increasing overall. If the requirement is increasing, if the threat perception is now more sort of troublesome than it was in the past, and we also take into account the internal security dimension of it, then I don't think that only by indigenizing we will be able to save enough money to meet the requirement. So what I'm saying is it is required, but to say that this is one of the main solutions to the problem.
So what could be the problem? I mean, overhead costs, salaries of those PSUs and all that stuff.
There are a lot of things. First of all, when you start indigenizing, unless you depend on transfer of technology, which again is costly, and nobody is going to give you state-of-the-art technology, you have to invest in R&D. When you invest in R&D, it's a learning curve. You take several years. You can't overnight have a company which will start making fighter aircraft and things like this. So it will take several years, by which time other countries will go forward. And in any case, it will take 10 to 15 to 20 years of intense focus on manufacturing to be able to come to a stage where you can say that you have something which meets your requirement. Look at Tejas, look at, any Indian program, how long it has taken, how much of money has gone into it. So I have my reservations on this as a means of saving money to be able to fund the requirement. Not on the merit of indigenization, but as I said, as a means of saving money to fund the defense requirements.
Saurav, please take us to an international level from here. Where do we see India's budget? Because people have been discussing, journalists like you, experts like you have spoken about the GDP numbers. Now the GDP numbers is like 1.52 when the pensions are done away with.
1.45 if just the defense budget is concerned.
1.45 is the GDP numbers. Now our GDP is growing. There was a committee around 10 years ago headed by Mr. Chidambaram, if I remember correctly, which talked about having a defense spend of 2.5% or 3% of the GDP. How are these GDP numbers important? Could you break it down for our listeners? Because the GDP anyway is growing, so the percentage will also fall or grow, whatever.
The defense budget is also growing. Of course, the denominator is growing faster than the numerator because the defense spend as a percentage of GDP has come down. When you look at the total expenditure of the Ministry of Defense, that is about 2.04% of GDP. When you talk just about the defense budget, which is the monies allocated to the defense services, DRDO, and some money allocated to the ordnance factories, which is about 71% of the total spending of the Ministry of Defense, that is at 1.45% of GDP. Of course, that number has also gone down over time. But at the end of the day, the fact remains that total capex as part of the defense budget, in the terms of actual acquisition of arms and equipment, that is around 24.3% of the total central government capex. And if you take into account total capital expenditure by the MOD, that is around 32%. So those are pretty high numbers. Spending getting the Ministry of Defense to spend 1/3 of your national budget, total capital expenditure is not
huge money.
It's a lot of money. The question of how you spend it better is always going to be there. We talked about indigenization. Indigenization also means jobs. It has a number of second order effects. It also means growing your GDP. It also means government revenue because you put GST on everything that you buy from industry. Of course, you can always say that it's one part of the government giving to other, but then the period under consideration on the same. And there is a very big issue here. Just because something is a shiny new toy on the international market doesn't mean it actually enhances your security. Software has become a much bigger part of weapon systems. Today we are talking about a system of systems. If you do not have control over the architecture of that system, your security is arguably reduced. There are software trojans that our people deal with. Our country has 2 hardware trojan testing facilities, destructive testing facilities, through which we put through some of our weapon systems which we suspect. So there are hardware trojans now. There are trojans down to the microchip level. So which means that de facto whatever you have imported from somebody is probably not usable against one country. It is at best usable against n-1 number of countries. One country being the source, the OEM for the weapon system. So it doesn't enhance security. Secondly, once you have already built up after spending so much money, then that catch-up paradigm doesn't exist anymore. Today, Lockheed Martin and America denied us the control law for the Tejas. We did it ourselves. Today, the Tejas boasts integrated integrated modular avionics. We can upgrade it whichever way we want. Of course, there are the limitations of the platform itself, but that is according to an ASQR. Nobody gave an ASQR for an Su-30 MKI in India.
Could you explain an ASQR?
ASQR is an air staff qualitative requirement. It is on the basis of which full-scale engineering development.
That means that benchmark for...
That is the benchmark. That is the basis on which any indigenous weapon is developed and evaluated after it is developed and presented to the services for evaluation. So the thing is that you have already built up a base. Now is the time to really invest and leapfrog. The leapfrogging that General Bhatia is talking about can happen now. How is it that India has a missile power today? India had nothing at all in the 60s. Today we have people who have tremendous capability in solid fuel missiles, heavy ICBM or something. We don't. Whatever we need we have, and now we are being able to develop a lot of tactical missiles also. This government with its focus on Make in India and its increasing focus should be on Made in India. Make in India. See, license produce items immediately you can say that there is a markup because of the simple reason that you will have to pay royalty. Then the OEM says you have to buy these items. There are OEM nominated equipment lists that you have to adhere to. Over the life cycle, an indigenous equipment, indigenous system will be cheaper. If you take the life cycle, if I take into account exchange rate variations, etc., etc., etc.
You had a very interesting take about software. Could you explain to our listeners, say a weapon fired, say in case of, let's go back to Balakot, in case the aircraft of the Mirage 2000 fires a Spice 2000, how does the software play a role into it?
A very big role. It plays a huge role. Any modern weapon system is basically a moving or a flying computer today. Okay, so there are interfaces. You cannot mix and match whatever weapon you like on some platform which is built into different technical standards. You need control over what is called the source codes. If you don't have the source codes, then you need the executable files. I'll give an example. Suppose you have a AMD device, okay, and you want to push in another peripheral device with which AMD has a dispute going on and it is not compatible. You will not be able to do it. If AMD gives you the source code for their processor, you might be able to do it. If you don't get the source code, which is usually denied, at least you need the executable files. Obviously, we have executable files for some of our systems with some of our old-time defense partners, which is why we have been able to upgrade some of our weapon systems, like the Mirage 2000, for instance, has been upgraded even with Soviet bloc air-to-air missiles. So, software plays the key role. Today, things are becoming software-defined. The hardware is going to be modular, and the software is what makes it modular. To mix and match, plug and play. If you don't have control over that, if you don't have control over systems level IP, your security will be reduced in the future.
General Bhatia, boots on the ground. You talked about LAC, the de facto boundary with China. We have boots on the ground along the Chinese frontier and also along the LOC and the international boundary with Pakistan, literally on every mountaintop. Can technology take over, sir? Artificial intelligence, one. And how, sir, will be the impact of cyber and space? Please link to ASAT tests. Do our defense budgets cater for that?
We will have to keep manning the borders. To that, there is no doubt till we find a resolution to the boundary question and the LC. So that is one part of it. Secondly, the security challenges for India are one too many. If you look at it, and tomorrow's new age warfare is a multi-domain warfare. The linear war is only a subset of the multi-domain warfare which we see happening now. And the multi-domain warfare is in all domains, and cyber and space and even underwater, there are major domains out there. So we have to prepare for the future, and we have to prepare for the multi-domain warfare in space. We have done I said we have the capabilities. I don't think we have the ability to do things, but whether we have the capability to execute the complete thing, that's where the question comes in. We have a demonstrated capability. We have the defense, so the Department of Atomic Energy Commission has done very, very well. We've done, the ISRO has done very, very well. So we have the ability to do things. It's not that we don't have ability, but we need to focus on things. I'm a firm believer that we want to indigenize things. We can't be importing the small arms. Look at a big country like ours, we're importing small arms. And we haven't met the smaller requirement of the inventory. We can talk big tickets, fine. Yes, okay, we need time to develop, and we should exploit what is available in the world markets. We are the largest importer of arms. And we've been the largest importer for many, many years now. So what we should look at is now at least create our own cyber capabilities, both in defense and deterrence capabilities, also space capabilities we already created, and integrate them into the other domains. We need to have integrated theater commands, into joint warfare, and I'm heading the Center for Joint Warfare Studies in any case. So these are required, so you can cut down on your costs, you can optimize your budgets, and you can possibly fight better, and you can also, deter better. So we need to do a number of things in that, and the future warfare we'll have to see, and we got to make sure that we have the right structures in place, right systems in place, and it is not only like, let's say we're talking about Pulwama and Balakot. In Balakot, we definitely won the battle. Everything right, executed beautifully, precision strikes, there's no doubt about it. So that's what I'm talking about. When I talk of multi-domain wars, it is all domains, and today's world, we have to be ready for today's challenges, and today's security challenges are the full spectrum of security challenges, starting from conventional, going out to nuclear, and also in all domains. And when I say all domains, we as a nation have done exceedingly well in the last few years in the geopolitical domain, in the diplomatic domain, in the economic domain. We have a large military, but my key question is, we are a military force and not a military power. And if you want your rightful seat in the high table, you have to have a military power also.
Cowshish sir, we have had a long relationship with the Russians since the Cold War, early 1960s. In the past 10, 12, 13 years, we also have a military relationship with the US. At the moment, it seems that we are balancing both the bigger countries very adequately. You foresee that we will have some kind of problem with either of them in the coming days? I'm talking with regards to Katsa, S-400 deal, and the US failed attempt to have us as a non-NATO ally.
Well, I don't see how India can possibly roll back its long-standing relationship with Russia. That's number one. And secondly, S-400 is a done deal. And again, I don't see any possibility, at least going by what being reported in the media and so on, I don't see any possibility of India, withdrawing from this deal. Insofar as Katsa is concerned, it's a real threat. But I think USA is pushing itself into a corner, because what is very clear is that this act was enacted without due consideration of its likely impact on the so-called major defense partners. I don't see how it is in India's interest to either be weaned away, quote unquote, from Russia, or withdraw from Java. So this is something which is very evident, which should have been very evident to everybody. And for the US to now say that the ball is in India's court is not correct. Actually, the ball is in the US court. And I don't think there's any solution that India can offer except, but coming back to the main question you asked, I don't see how India can go in one camp withdrawing from the other camp. I don't think it's in India's interest.
Saurabh, quickly, the Navy has been talking about, rather the country has been talking about, our area of interest being from the Straits of Hormuz to our west and the Straits of Malacca to our east. Wide area. We need a huge budget to patrol that. We need probably drones, we need more ships, we need more surveillance planes. What kind of an impact will that have?
Again, as I said, we cannot possibly... See, the other thing about indigenization is when you actually indigenize, and when you do, then there will be industry lobbies, and there will be other lobbies which will themselves lobby for a larger budget for the Indian Armed Forces, and it will be more justifiable as well. Because right now you have a number of social priorities which you can't meet. So at the same time you want to keep your fiscal deficit to 3.2% of GDP. Obviously not going to be able to spend all that is required. But here let us look at what the Navy has done. The Navy has indigenized, and the Navy can actually has reasonable amount of confidence in nuclear submarines constructed in India with Russian collaboration. Okay, but at least the reactor was developed by BARC, and it also has confidence in an aircraft carrier, which Cochin Shipyard Limited is saying will be delivered by 2021. We have to concertedly move forward. We need jointness across the board, as General Bhatia said, not just between the services. We need civil-military integration.
Thank you, Saurabh, and we have run out of time. We have to close the show. We have discussed the military budget of India, which stands at 4.31 lakh crores, constitutes around 15% of the government spending, and the budgets, as per the experts, will remain the same. The country has other priorities. Military has been getting enough. How they spend it will be very important. We will have to keep boots on the ground along the LAC with China and also along with Pakistan. The relationship with the US and the Russians is at an even keel. It will take some time to pan out. Indigenization is the key. Next 10 years or 20 years will decide where India sits on the global table. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you, General Bhatia. Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Cowshish sir.
You were listening to a discussion on defense allocation and defense preparedness. The participants were Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, Amit Cowshish, former financial advisor, acquisitions at Ministry of Defense, Saurav Jha, Chief Editor, Delhi Defense Review, and Ajay Banerjee, Defense Correspondent, who initiated and moderated the discussion. The program was devised and produced by Sharmila Goswami with assistance in production by Savita Kheda. This broadcast came to you from the General Overseas Service of All India Radio in our program Dateline Delhi.